use this thing. So back in app.js, we want to import this and do something with it. So I will import lowercase b base from, not base.example, but base.js. That way we can use it. So if we look at the README for Rebase again, and we're done with this thing, so we can close this on Firebase. Under features, it says sync state. Two-way data binding between any property on your component state and any endpoint in Firebase. Okay, use the same API you're used to update your component set state, and Firebase will also update. So we make a change. The change is reflected in the Firebase database. If we actually click through to get to the documentation for sync state, it's a little more specific. Whenever your Firebase changes, your component state will change. Whenever your component state changes, Firebase will change. So that's what it means by two-way binding. Changing either place and the other one updates automatically. There are some risks with two-way binding, but it fits the bill pretty dang well for what we're doing. So sync state. This is something that we want to happen before it draws anything on the page. Basically, as soon as the constructor is finished running. So did anyone happen to use any lifecycle methods in their homework or anything they've done so far? What'd you use? Component did mount. So all these lifecycle methods, these are things that are built in to React, and they're available to our component as long as we actually inherited from React component. If it's a stateless functional component, we can't use lifecycle methods, so you'd have to change it back to a class. But app is already a class, so we should have that. Since they're defined in the parent class, if we override them here, what'll happen is it will automatically call them at certain points in the component's lifecycle. This is documented on the react.component section of the React docs. Each component has several lifecycle methods that you can override to run code at particular times in the process. Methods prefixed with will are called right before something happens, and methods prefixed with did are called right after something happens. So mounting, updating, unmounting, those are the things that happen, and they each have will and did. So the mounting methods are called when an instance of a component is being created and inserted into the DOM. So the constructor runs first, then component will mount runs, then the DOM is actually rendered, then component did mount is run. So he used component did mount, which means that as soon as it's drawn on the page, it'll call this. Now for what we're about to do, I'm going to use component will mount because I want it to happen before it draws it on the page, ideally, even though it's an asynchronous thing and may take some time. So all I have to do is add another method called component will mount. And it will just automatically get called at the right time. So what I want to do is call this sync state method from Rebase. And we imported this base object that we exported from base.js. Yeah. In the parent class, there is. Yeah. So each component has several lifecycle methods that you can override to run code at particular times in the process. Yeah. So we don't need to call super or anything. We just need to do it, and it will automatically call the method named that at the right time. Yep. So our base here, which was the result of calling rebase.createClass with the database reference, we can call sync state on that. It has two arguments, endpoint and options. If we look at the documentation on the Rebase project, argument number 1, endpoint. It's a string, and it is the relative Firebase endpoint to which you'd like to bind your component's state. So an endpoint on an API is basically a URL that you can hit to make it do something. And what it means as far as a relative endpoint goes is this. So if we look at the database section of Firebase, the Firebase console, this is our database. There's nothing in it. Let's add something. Let's hit this little plus here. Give it a name. Let's give it a name of notes. Instead of typing a string value in here, let's hit plus again, and that will create another level nested underneath that. And let's give it a key of note-1. And let's have that again point not at a string, but at another object. And we'll give it an ID of note1. Plus again, add a title of note from Firebase, and give it a body of, I hope this works. It can't be this easy, right? And make sure you click add at the end. And there you go. You see it's a tree-like structure, much like objects. So when it says a relative path, it means something like notes, or notes/note1, or notes/note1/body. That's the kind of thing it wants a reference to here. So the endpoint is a string, the relative Firebase endpoint to which you'd like to bind your component state. So let's just sync it to the string notes. So this notes key in our database. Second argument, options. And options is an object itself. It's an object with properties context. Context is required, it says. And that is the context of your component. Yeah, Dave. So you won't down here because it's a string. But on anything that you haven't made a string already, if you haven't given it a string value, you can hit plus to add another object underneath it. So it says context is the first key. I must put in my options object there. And it says it's the context of your component. What is the context of our component? This. That's all it means. But we've got to pass that in to sync state. Next, it says state, also required. The state property you want to sync with Firebase can be arbitrarily nested a la foo.bar. This is again a string. So you tell it what key inside state you want to sync with Firebase. And we want to sync state.notes. So we simply pass in the string notes. And we've told it that the notes, that needed to be called state, right? State : notes. We've told it that we want to sync notes from our state with notes in Firebase. Alrighty. Let's pop on over to our application. Holy smokes, there it is, note from Firebase. I hope this works. It can't be this easy, right? Sure it can. What if I add another one? Note from the app. Will this just show up in Firebase? Let's look. Look at that. We've got note 1. Now I've got note dash timestamp. Will this just show up in Firebase? Note from the app. Yep, it works. Change something up in Firebase, and it ends up in our app. Change something in our app, and it ends up in Firebase. And it's just that easy. Anytime we change state, it's going to sync. Anytime Firebase changes, it's going to sync. Yeah, James? Firebase hasn't been closed down. No. Yeah. Yes, exactly. Yeah, it is the same idea. Yeah, Parse was a backend as a service. Yeah. Sorry for the smarty pants answer. But yeah, very similar. Very much designed to solve the same problem. All right. Yeah, they closed down. Couldn't swing it financially. Yeah. Once Google bought Firebase. Firebase was a separate company. It was a startup. Yeah. Sync with Firebase real-time database.